Japanese tourists pose with the king's guard. A tall officer wearing a dark blue uniform was approaching them quickly. His face was stern, and his eyes were serious as he walked toward them, clearly disapproving of their actions. Yuki, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, turned to Haruto. "Oh no, what do we do now?" she whispered. Haruto, not wanting to get into trouble, quickly lowered his camera. "I think we need to apologize," he said, nervously glancing around. The officer stopped in front of them, eyeing the two tourists with a mixture of irritation and amusement. "You can't just ask the guards for photos," he said. "They're on duty and it's not allowed." Yuki, her face turning bright red, immediately bowed and apologized. "We're sorry. We didn't mean to cause any trouble. We were so excited." The officer's face softened slightly. "Just remember to be respectful, all right," he said. "They're here to do their job, and you're not the only ones who want a photo. It's not a tourist attraction." Yuki nodded, grateful that the officer wasn't being too harsh. "We understand," she said quietly. She glanced at the guard one more time, who remained motionless, his gaze unchanging. She offered a small, apologetic smile, though she wasn't sure if he noticed. As Yuki and Haruto turned to leave, they both felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. They hadn't intended to break any rules or make anyone uncomfortable, but they couldn't help but feel like they had done something wrong. "Well," Haruto said with a chuckle, "that's one way to start a trip." Yuki laughed nervously. "Yeah, not exactly what I had in mind, but at least we'll never forget it." And with that, they continued on their way, leaving the palace behind, their minds buzzing with the mix of excitement, tension, and regret that only an adventure like this could create. As Yuki and Haruto walked away from Buckingham Palace, their minds were buzzing with a mix of excitement and embarrassment. Their encounter with the king's guard had been more intense than they expected, and now they were both unsure of how to feel about it. The guard's sternness, the officer's warning, it all had happened so quickly. But despite the awkwardness, Yuki couldn't shake off the thrill of being so close to something so historic, and Haruto, though still a little uneasy, found himself smiling at the thought of the strange experience. "I didn't think it would be so tense," Haruto said, breaking the silence between them as they walked through the streets of London. Yuki laughed softly. "I didn't either. But come on, it was kind of exciting, don't you think? We actually stood right next to one of the most famous guards in the world." Haruto nodded, still feeling a little embarrassed. "Yeah, but I felt like we were breaking some sort of rule. What if we really annoyed him?" "I think he was fine," Yuki said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Did you see how he looked at us for a second? I think he might have even smiled." Haruto looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "A smile from the king's guard? No way." "I'm serious. It was a tiny movement, but it was there," Yuki insisted, trying to convince him. "He was probably just being polite." "Besides, we weren't the only ones taking photos, right?" Haruto chuckled. "True. I guess we weren't the only tourists trying to get a shot with the guards." They continued walking, still discussing the strange encounter as they made their way through the crowded streets of London. They passed by tourists taking photos of the iconic red buses, the double-decker ones that Yuki had always seen in travel magazines. The air was cool, and the city felt alive with energy, as if everyone was out and about, soaking in the beauty of the day. Despite the excitement of their royal encounter, Yuki couldn't help but feel a little uncertain. She had always dreamed of visiting London, but now that they were here, things didn't always go as she had imagined. The world-famous landmarks were beautiful, but there was a certain weight to them that she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about taking photos and ticking off items from a tourist checklist. There was a sense of history, a deep feeling of tradition that came with places like Buckingham Palace. And when you added the King's Guard to the mix, that history felt even more real. As they walked further down the street, they decided to stop for a quick coffee in a small cafe. The place was cozy, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The soft hum of conversations around them made it feel like the heart of the city. Yuki and Haruto found a small table by the window, and as they sat down, the events of the morning began to feel like a distant memory. Yuki pulled out her camera, scrolling through the pictures they had taken earlier. "I still can't believe we got those photos," she said, grinning. "I mean, they're not perfect, but they're definitely memorable." Haruto leaned over to look at the pictures on her screen. "Yeah, they're pretty good, even if the guard wasn't exactly smiling. But you're right, we'll always remember that moment." Yuki's excitement was still evident, but Haruto was beginning to feel more relaxed. "Maybe next time we'll find a quieter spot to take a photo," he joked. "One where the guards aren't standing like statues." "Huh. But that's the whole point, isn't it? They're not supposed to be entertaining us. It's their job to stand still and keep watch," Yuki replied, laughing. "I bet it's hard for them, especially when tourists are constantly trying to take pictures." "I can't imagine how boring that must be," Haruto said, thinking about it. "Standing in one spot for hours with no movement at all. No wonder they have to be so serious all the time." "I guess," Yuki said, nodding. "But that's part of their job and it's kind of impressive. I mean, imagine having that kind of discipline and focus." As they sipped their coffee, they started to talk about other parts of their trip. They had already visited the famous London Eye and walked through Covent Garden, marveling at the street performers and the variety of shops. The city felt so different from Tokyo, yet somehow familiar. There was a special energy here, something that made them feel like they were a part of something much larger than themselves. Haruto, still feeling a bit shy about the earlier incident, asked, "So, what's next? Are we going to visit the Tower of London?" Yuki nodded, her face lighting up. "Yes, I've been wanting to see the tower for so long. It's where the crown jewels are kept and it's full of history. Plus, I heard there's a cool exhibition about the kings and queens who lived there." Haruto smiled. "Sounds like a plan. I'm sure it'll be much calmer than Buckingham Palace." As they finished their drinks and gathered their things, Yuki noticed something strange outside the window. A familiar figure caught her eye, a tall man in a dark blue uniform, standing outside the cafe. At first, she didn't recognize him, but as he took a few steps closer, her heart skipped a beat. It was one of the king's guards from earlier. He was no longer wearing his red uniform or his bearskin hat. Instead, he was dressed casually in a dark jacket and jeans. But there was no mistaking his posture, the way he stood tall, his back straight, as if he carried a quiet sense of authority. Yuki's eyes widened in surprise, and she nudged Haruto, who turned to look. "Isn't that one of the guards?" Yuki whispered, her voice full of disbelief. Haruto squinted at the man, then nodded. "It definitely looks like him. What's he doing here?" Yuki felt a little nervous. "Do you think we should say something?" "I mean, we did take pictures with him earlier, even if he didn't exactly smile." Haruto shrugged. "Maybe he's just a regular person too, right? I'm sure he's not in guard mode all the time." But Yuki felt unsure. What if he remembered their earlier encounter and didn't want to talk to them? Maybe they had embarrassed him without even realizing it. But before she could second-guess herself, the man's eyes met hers. There was a brief pause. He looked at her for a moment and then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Yuki's heart raced. It was the same guard from earlier, the one who had remained still and serious, not even acknowledging them. But now, in his civilian clothes, he looked completely different. He wasn't standing on duty anymore. He was just a regular person like anyone else. His smile was small, but it was warm and friendly. Yuki took a deep breath and, feeling a little braver, waved at him. "Hello," she called out, her voice almost shaking. "I didn't expect to see you here." The man's smile widened and he walked over to their table. "Well, I can't always be on duty, can I?" he said, his tone light and casual. "But yes, I was the one you took pictures with earlier." Yuki and Haruto were both surprised. The guard wasn't upset or angry. Instead, he seemed amused by their earlier enthusiasm. He pulled out a chair and sat down at their table as if they were old friends. "You know," the guard said, leaning in slightly, "I've seen hundreds of tourists come and go, asking for photos and trying to get my attention. Most of the time I just stand there and pretend I don't notice. But something about you too. I don't know. You didn't just treat me like a statue." Yuki and Haruto both looked at him, amazed. He was actually talking to them, not just as a guard, but as a person. "We didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," Yuki said quickly. "We just wanted a photo, and I guess we were a little too excited." The guard chuckled. "Don't worry, I get it. Honestly, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes, but it's all part of the job. And besides, it's not every day that someone wants to take a photo with me." Yuki smiled, feeling a wave of relief. She was glad to know that the guard didn't hold their earlier behavior against them. The conversation flowed easily from there, as they talked about London, the guard's experiences, and the funny moments that came with his job. It was a short conversation, but it made their day even more memorable than before. In that moment, Yuki realized that sometimes the best parts of travel weren't the famous landmarks or the iconic sights. It was the unexpected moments, like meeting a guard who, for a brief time, let down his serious persona and became just another person in the crowd. The conversation with the king's guard was a pleasant surprise for Yuki and Haruto. What had started as an awkward attempt to get a photo with the guards had turned into a memorable moment, a chance to connect with someone they'd admired from afar. But as they finished their coffee and said goodbye to the friendly guard, the day wasn't over yet. In fact, it was only getting started. As they walked through the streets of London, Yuki and Haruto couldn't stop talking about their unexpected encounter. Yuki was still excited, and though Haruto was more reserved, he couldn't deny that the moment had made their trip feel more real. It wasn't just about the sights anymore. It was about the stories they were collecting along the way, the people they met, and the experiences that came with each step. "We can't tell anyone back home about this yet," Yuki said, laughing. "No one will believe us." Haruto smiled, the corners of his mouth curling into a soft grin. "Yeah, who would think we'd have a conversation with one of the king's guards?" Yuki's eyes twinkled as she looked around at the busy London streets. There were so many things to see, so many places to explore. They had only just scratched the surface. "So what's next? We could head to the Tower of London, right?" Haruto agreed. "I've heard about it. It's where the crown jewels are kept, right? Plus, it's full of history, should be fun." "Definitely. I've always wanted to see the crown jewels," Yuki said, practically bouncing with excitement. "And the stories behind the tower, it's amazing how many kings and queens were involved in its history. It feels like stepping back in time." The Tower of London wasn't far from where they were, so they decided to walk. As they strolled down the cobbled streets, Yuki couldn't help but think about how different the city was from Tokyo. London was bustling with tourists, but there was also a sense of calm in some places, a quietness that came with the age-old history around them. Even the air felt different, a little fresher somehow. It was as though the city had its own rhythm, one that wasn't in a rush to go anywhere. When they finally arrived at the Tower of London, they stood outside for a moment, taking it all in. The fortress-like structure stood tall, its stone walls telling tales of centuries of royal history. The famous White Tower in the center was imposing, and the surrounding walls were filled with ancient stories, stories of battles, betrayals, and royal intrigue. The place was awe-inspiring, and for a brief moment, Yuki and Haruto stood in silence, admiring the strength and majesty of the building. "It feels like we've stepped into a different time," Haruto said quietly, almost in awe. Yuki nodded, her eyes scanning the towering structure. "I know what you mean. It's hard to imagine all that history happened right here. I mean, kings and queens lived here, and the crown jewels, all of it." They joined the line to enter the tower, excited to see what was inside. The atmosphere was much quieter here than at Buckingham Palace, and it seemed like everyone was taking in the history in a more contemplative way. As they walked through the gates, they were greeted by a beefeater, one of the famous yeoman warders who worked at the tower. The beefeater was wearing a traditional red and black uniform, complete with a wide-brimmed hat and a stern expression. His job was to guard the tower, but he also served as a tour guide, sharing his knowledge about the history of the place. Yuki, always keen on learning new things, was eager to hear what he had to say. "What can you tell us about the Tower of London?" she asked, stepping forward. The beefeater smiled, his expression softening a little. "Ah, well, this place is full of stories. It's been a royal palace, a prison, and even a zoo, but most people know it best as the home of the crown jewels." "Crown jewels?" Haruto asked, his curiosity piqued. "They're the royal treasures," the beefeater explained. "The crowns, the scepters, the diamonds, all the symbols of royal power. They're kept safe right here behind those walls." Yuki could hardly wait to see them. "That sounds amazing." "I've read about them, but seeing them in person, it's going to be something else." The beefeater led them through the tower, showing them the different sections of the fortress. They saw the prison cells where famous prisoners, like Anne Boleyn, had been held before their executions. The walls of the tower seemed to whisper secrets of the past, and Yuki could almost imagine what life must have been like for the people who had lived and died there. The stone floors were worn down by centuries of footsteps, and every corner of the building seemed to carry a piece of history. Haruto was fascinated by the stories the beefeater shared. He had always enjoyed history, especially when it was told through the eyes of someone who lived it. The beefeater spoke with such passion that it made the ancient history come alive. It wasn't just about dates and events. It was about the people, the drama, and the choices they made. As they continued their tour, they arrived at the Crown Jewels exhibit. The room was dimly lit, with bright lights shining down on the glittering treasures. There were crowns, tiaras, and golden scepters, all sparkling with jewels. The largest crown was used for coronations, and it was studded with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. Yuki's eyes widened in amazement. "They look even more beautiful than I imagined," Yuki whispered, barely able to contain her awe. Haruto, equally impressed, was speechless for a moment. He had seen pictures of the crown jewels before, but seeing them in person was a different experience. The jewels weren't just beautiful. They were a symbol of power, history, and tradition. They spent a long time in the exhibit, admiring the treasures and listening to the beefeater's explanations. As they left the room, Yuki felt a deep sense of appreciation for the history that had unfolded in this very place. The crown jewels weren't just objects of beauty. They were part of the story of the British monarchy, representing centuries of tradition and power. After the crown jewels exhibit, they visited the White Tower, which housed weapons and armor used by kings and knights throughout history. They marveled at the suits of armor that were displayed, each one intricately designed and painstakingly crafted. The detail in the armor was incredible, and Yuki couldn't help but wonder about the people who had worn them. They must have been warriors, brave and strong, ready to defend the kingdom. By the time they had finished exploring the Tower of London, the sun was beginning to set. The sky had turned a soft shade of orange, and the cool evening air was starting to settle in. Yuki and Haruto stood outside the tower, looking up at the ancient walls. "That was incredible," Haruto said, his voice full of wonder. "I never imagined I'd learned so much today." Yuki smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "It was amazing. I feel like we've traveled through time, seeing the real history of England, not just the tourist attractions." They walked away from the tower, their feet tired but their hearts full. As they strolled through the streets of London, they felt more connected to the city, to the people who had shaped its history, and to each other. The day had been full of surprises, from the unexpected encounter with the King's Guard to the awe-inspiring experience at the Tower of London. It was a day neither of them would ever forget. The night was falling, and the lights of London started to twinkle in the distance. They knew their adventure was far from over. There were still so many places to see, so many stories to uncover. But for now, as they walked side by side, they were content, grateful for the unforgettable experiences they had already shared. As the evening grew darker, Yuki and Haruto decided to take a leisurely walk through the historic streets of London. The city had a different feel at night, with the lights of the streets and the glowing windows of shops adding a special charm to the atmosphere. They weren't in a hurry, taking in the beauty of the city's buildings, the sounds of people chatting, and the occasional soft whir of buses passing by. London really feels alive at night, doesn't it? Yuki said, glancing around at the glowing landmarks. There's something magical about it. Haruto smiled, his hands in his pockets. Yeah, it's not like Tokyo, but there's definitely a unique energy here. I feel like every corner of this city has a story to tell. They continued their walk through the city, past Westminster Abbey and along the River Thames, where the lights of the famous London Eye shimmered in the distance. The majestic bridge crossings, like the Tower Bridge, made the city seem even more impressive when lit up against the dark sky. Yuki could feel her feet getting tired, but the excitement from their day made it hard to stop moving. They'd visited so many iconic places already, from Buckingham Palace to the Tower of London, and there was still so much more to see. But today had been special. They hadn't just seen the landmarks, they'd connected with the city in a deeper way. The unexpected encounter with the King's Guard had started it all, followed by the fascinating history they'd uncovered at the Tower of London. Yet there was still one more thing Yuki was eager to do before the night was over. "How about a ride on the London Eye?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. "I've always wanted to see London from the top, especially at night. The views must be amazing." Haruto raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of heights." Yuki laughed. "Come on just once, it'll be a cool experience. You're only in London for the first time, you have to do it." Haruto hesitated for a moment before giving in. All right, just because you really want to, but you're buying the tickets." They made their way toward the London Eye, a giant Ferris wheel that stood tall against the darkening sky. As they approached, they could already see the bright, colorful lights illuminating the wheel. The giant pods, suspended high above the ground, looked like glowing spheres in the night sky. Standing in line, Yuki couldn't contain her excitement. "This is going to be incredible. We'll be able to see the whole city, and it'll be so different from being on the ground." "Just imagine what it looks like from up there." Haruto chuckled, but he wasn't sure if he felt as excited. He wasn't fond of heights, and the thought of being so high up in the air made his stomach flutter. But he didn't want to ruin Yuki's fun. She had been so enthusiastic about the trip, and this was one of her top things to do in London. He could handle a little nervousness for her sake. When it was finally their turn to board the London Eye, Yuki's eyes widened as she stepped into the pod. The pod was spacious, with large glass windows all around. As it began to move, slowly but steadily, Yuki pressed her hands against the glass and looked out over the city. The lights of London stretched out before them like a sea of twinkling stars. "It's amazing," Yuki said, her voice full of awe. "Look at the view, you can see everything." Haruto, a little more cautious, stood at the edge of the pod, trying not to focus too much on the height. The feeling of being up so high was unsettling, but he couldn't deny that the view was breathtaking. From up here, London looked different, almost like a dream. The Thames River snaked through the city, its waters reflecting the city lights. The bridges, the iconic buildings, even the rooftops of the houses, all seemed so much more beautiful from above. "This is unbelievable," Haruto admitted, his voice tinged with a hint of wonder. "It's a completely different perspective." Yuki, still beaming, pointed out various landmarks as the wheel turned. "There's Big Ben, and there's St. Paul's Cathedral, and look, You can see the whole River Thames winding through the city. It's like a map come to life. For a few minutes, they stood side by side, taking it all in. Yuki's eyes sparkled with excitement, while Haruto slowly began to relax. The view from the top of the London Eye was so beautiful and peaceful that even his fear of heights seemed to melt away. He could see the city in a way he never could have imagined. It was like being in the middle of a painting, with all the lights and movement below adding to the city's energy. As the wheel continued its slow rotation, Yuki noticed something that caught her eye. She spotted a familiar shape in the distance, the Tower of London, where they had spent the afternoon. From up here, it looked even more impressive, its ancient stone walls glowing softly in the light. Yuki smiled to herself, thinking back to the fascinating stories the beefeater had shared. Now, seeing the tower from above, she felt an even deeper connection to the city and its history. "I'll never forget today," Yuki said, her voice full of emotion. "I can't believe how much we've seen, and it's only been one day." Haruto turned to her and smiled. "Yeah, it's been a crazy day, but you know what? It's been fun. I think I'll always remember the guard photo, the tower, and now this view." Yuki smiled back at him. "I'm glad you're enjoying it. There's still so much more to do, but today was definitely a highlight. I'm glad we're sharing this together." For a while, they both stood silently, watching the city unfold beneath them. The lights shimmered in the distance, and the night sky was clear, dotted with stars. It felt like they were floating above the world, far away from everything but the beauty of the moment. Eventually, the London Eye began to descend, and the pod slowly brought them back down to Earth. The ride had lasted long enough for them to take in every corner of the city, and as the pod touched the ground, they felt both relaxed and energized. "That was incredible," Haruto said as they stepped off the ride. "I think I might actually be okay with heights after this." Yuki laughed. "See, I told you it wouldn't be so bad, and the view was totally worth it, right?" Haruto nodded. "Definitely. I didn't think I'd like it, but it was amazing." As they made their way down the steps and toward the exit, the city seemed even more magical than before. The night air was crisp, and the lights of the London Eye reflected in the Thames below. The busy streets were filled with people still enjoying the night, and the energy of the city felt endless. But as much as they loved London, Yuki couldn't help but think about something else. The day had been full of incredible experiences, from their unexpected encounter with the King's Guard to the breathtaking views from the London Eye. But there was still one more thing on her mind. She turned to Haruto and asked, "So, what do you think of London so far? Are you ready for another adventure tomorrow?" Haruto grinned. "You bet I am. What's next on the list?" Yuki's eyes sparkled as she pulled out her travel guide and started flipping through the pages. "Well, tomorrow we could explore Camden Market or maybe take a trip out to Stonehenge. Or we could do something completely different." Haruto smiled, his heart filled with excitement. "Whatever we do, I'm in." And with that, they continued walking through the streets of London, eager to see where their next adventure would take them. The city was full of surprises, and they knew they were only just getting started the next morning. Yuki and Haruto woke up early, eager to start another day of adventure in London. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly through the window of their hotel room. It felt like the perfect day to explore more of what the city had to offer. Yuki was already buzzing with excitement, eager to get out and see even more of the sights, while Haruto, though still a bit tired from their busy day before, was excited for whatever came next. Yuki stretched and smiled. "We have so much left to see. I can't believe how much we've already done, but there's still so much more." Haruto nodded, feeling the same way. "It's crazy. Yesterday was full of surprises, from meeting the guard to seeing the crown jewels. I didn't expect it to be so magical." Yuki grinned, remembering their time at the Tower of London and their ride on the London Eye. "Yeah, and I'm still not over that view from the London Eye. London looks so different from up there." The city had truly left an impression on both of them. As they got ready for the day, Yuki and Haruto talked about their favorite moments so far. For Yuki, it was the unexpected connection they made with the king's guard, something she would always remember. Haruto, on the other hand, was still thinking about the crown jewels. The glittering gems, the gold, and the sense of history that surrounded them were unlike anything he had ever seen before. But they both agreed that it wasn't just the landmarks that had made their trip so special. It was the people, the little surprises, and the way London had felt alive, even in its quietest corners. After a quick breakfast, they set off for their next adventure. Yuki had planned a visit to Camden Market, a lively and colorful market known for its street food, unique shops, and artistic vibe. They hopped on the Underground, excited to experience a different side of London. The subway ride was smooth, and the train hummed along as they moved from one part of the city to the next. Yuki was thrilled, imagining all the interesting things they would find at the market. Haruto, who wasn't as keen on crowds, hoped there would be quieter spots where they could relax and take in the atmosphere. When they arrived at Camden, they were immediately struck by the energy of the place. The market was full of people, tourists, locals, and street performers all weaving through the maze of stalls. The smell of food filled the air, mixing with the sounds of music from a nearby band. There were vibrant clothes, jewelry, antiques, and artwork everywhere they looked. It felt like they had stepped into a different world, one that was much more laid back and creative than the traditional sights they had seen before. Yuki couldn't help but be drawn to the colorful stalls selling everything from vintage clothes to handmade crafts. She stopped at a booth that sold quirky jewelry and ran her fingers over the unique pieces. "Look at this necklace, Haruto. It's so unusual, I think I might buy it." Haruto, not as interested in shopping, smiled at her enthusiasm. "It's definitely one of a kind. Maybe you should get it. You could always remember Camden by it." Yuki beamed and decided to buy the necklace, feeling like it would be a perfect souvenir from one of the most vibrant places they had visited. They continued walking through the market, stopping to try some street food, a delicious mix of international flavors. They ate freshly made crepes, spicy kebabs, and even some famous London fish and chips. Each bite was an experience of its own, giving them a taste of the diverse culture that London had to offer. As they walked deeper into Camden, Yuki noticed something that caught her eye. There was a small art gallery tucked between two stalls, its windows filled with paintings and sketches of London's landmarks, many of them depicting the royal guards they had seen earlier. Intrigued, they stepped inside. The gallery was small but cozy, with the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. The paintings were beautiful, each one capturing a different moment in time. Some showed Buckingham Palace in the golden light of morning, others captured the quiet majesty of the King's Guard standing still at their posts. Yuki felt a sense of connection to the art. She walked from one painting to the next, admiring the skill of the artists and the way they had captured the spirit of London. Haruto stood in front of one painting that particularly intrigued him. It showed a group of beefeaters standing guard in front of the Tower of London. The detail in the artwork was incredible, and the colors seemed to bring the figures to life. He could almost hear the sounds of the city in the background. "This is amazing," Haruto said softly, his fingers lightly touching the frame of the painting. "The artist really captured the feeling of being at the tower." Yuki smiled. "It's beautiful. I wish we could take a piece of London home with us, don't you?" "I think we already have," Haruto replied, glancing at the small necklace Yuki had bought earlier. "We'll always have the memories." After exploring the market, they decided to visit one more place before calling it a day, the famous Covent Garden. Known for its street performers, boutique shops, and charming atmosphere, Covent Garden was another one of those places that seemed to have its own magic. As they arrived, they were greeted by the sound of a street performer playing a violin. his music floating through the air and adding to the lively atmosphere. The cobblestone streets were filled with people enjoying the sights and sounds, and the colorful market stalls added a sense of charm to the area. Yuki and Haruto wandered through the square, stopping to watch a group of acrobats performing for an excited crowd. The energy in Covent Garden was contagious, and even Haruto, who was usually more reserved, couldn't help but smile at the performers' daring tricks. They also found a small cafe tucked in the corner of the square. It was the perfect spot to sit, relax, and reflect on the day. As they sipped on warm cups of tea, Yuki and Haruto talked about everything they had seen and experienced in London. From the King's Guard to the Tower of London, the London Eye, Camden Market, and Covent Garden, it had been an unforgettable trip. They had explored the rich history, tasted the food, and met the people who brought the city to life. They both agreed that it had been the kind of trip they would remember forever. "I can't believe how much we've seen in such a short time," Yuki said, looking around at the bustling square. "It feels like we've lived 1,000 stories in just a few days." Haruto nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It's like London is full of surprises. Everywhere we go, there's something new, but I think the best part has been experiencing it all with you." Yuki smiled warmly. "Me too, Haruto. I'm so glad we decided to do this together. It's not just about the sights but the memories we're making." As the evening approached and the lights of Covent Garden began to shine brighter, Yuki and Haruto reflected on how much they had grown during their time in London. It wasn't just about the places they had seen, but the way the city had inspired them to look at the world differently. They had arrived as tourists, but now they were leaving with a deeper understanding of the city, its history, and the people who called it home. The trip had been more than just a vacation. It had been a journey of discovery, connection, and growth. As they walked back to their hotel, Yuki and Haruto promised each other that they would always carry a piece of London with them, the city of history, culture, and unexpected moments that had brought them closer together. The next morning they would leave for home, but the memories they had made would stay with them forever. London had been everything they hoped for and more, and as they boarded their flight back to Japan, they knew that one day they would return. For now, though, they carried the city in their hearts, knowing that some journeys, no matter how short, leave a lasting impact.